for the opportunity that should be available to people of all races and from all walks of life. Because Dr. King understood that the struggle for economic justice and the struggle for racial justice were really one, that each was a part of a larger struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity. So long as Americans were trapped in poverty, so long as they were being denied decent wages and benefits and fair treatment, so long as opportunity was being opened to some but not all, the dream that he spoke of would remain out of reach. And on the eve of this death, Dr. King gave a sermon in Memphis about what the movement meant to him and to America. And in tones that would prove eerily prophetic, Dr. King said that despite the threats that he had received, he didn't fear any man, because he had been there when Birmingham aroused this conscience of a nation. He had been there to see the students stand up for freedom by sitting at lunch counters. And he'd been there in Memphis when it was dark enough to see the stars, to see the community coming together around a common purpose. So Dr. King had been to the mountaintop. He had seen the promised land. And while he knew somewhere deep in his bones that he would not get there with us, he knew that we would get there. He knew it because he had seen that Americans have the capacity, as he said that night, to project the I into the thou, to recognize that no matter what color of our skin, no matter what faith we practice, no matter how much money we have, no matter whether we are a sanitation worker or a United States senator, we all have a stake in one another. We are our brother's keeper. We are our sister's keeper. We are our brother's keeper, our sister's keeper, and I quote him, either we go up together or we go down together. And when he was killed the following day, it left a wound on the soul of our nation that is not yet fully healed. In few places was the pain more pronounced than in Indianapolis, where Robert Kennedy happened to be campaigning. And as Mike mentioned, it fell to him to inform a crowd in a park that Dr. King had been killed. Some of you heard the recordings, the shouts, the pain that were heard as Robert Kennedy made that statement. And as the shock turned into anger, Kennedy reminded them of Dr. King's compassion and his love. And on a night when cities across the nation were alight with violence, all was quiet in Indianapolis. In the dark days after Dr. King's death, Coretta Scott King pointed out the stars. She took up her husband's cause and led a march in Memphis. I had a chance to meet Coretta Scott King on several occasions, visit with her in her apartment down in Atlanta. I remember asking her how she was able to manage all those burdens, and she would explain that it's never about me. It was never about Martin. It's about God's will and God's plan for us. Coretta Scott King took up that cause and helped to lead a march in Memphis, even though she was still grieving. Those sanitation workers eventually won their contract. However, the struggle for economic justice remains an unfinished part of the King legacy, because the dream is still out of reach for too many Americans. Just this morning it was announced that more Americans are unemployed now than at any time in years. And all across this country, families are facing rising costs, stagnant wages, and the terrible burden of losing a home. Part of the problem is that for a long time we've had a politics that's been too small for the scale of the challenges we face. This is something I spoke about a few weeks ago in a speech I gave in Philadelphia. What I said was that instead of having a politics that's living up to Dr. King's call for unity, we've had a politics that's used race to drive us apart, when all this does is feed the forces of division and distraction and stop us from solving our problems. That is why the great need of this hour is much the same as it was when Dr. King delivered his sermon in Memphis. We have to recognize that while we each have a different past, we all share the same hopes for the future. We all hope we can find a job that pays a decent wage, that there will be affordable health care when we get sick, that we'll be able to send our kids to college, that after a lifetime of hard work, we'll be able to retire with security. They are common hopes, modest dreams, and they're at the heart of the struggle for freedom and dignity and humanity that Dr. King began, and that is our task to complete. You know, Dr. King once said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It bends towards justice. But here's the thing. It does not bend on its own. It bends because each of us, in our own ways, put our hand on that arc and we bend it in the direction of justice. Because we organize and we mobilize, we march, we vote, we parent, we're active in our community, we're active in our schools. So on this day, of all days, let us each do our part to bend that arc. Let's bend it towards justice. Let's bend that arc towards opportunity. Let's bend that arc towards prosperity for all. And if we can do that and march together as one nation and one people, then we won't just be keeping faith with Dr. King's dream, all that he lived and died for. We'll be making real the words of Amos that he evoked so often and said, "Let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream." Thank you very much, Fort Wayne. Thank you.